There we go. I am going to switch the host to Joe and Noah.
Well, hello. Hello. Well, hello all. Thank you so much for being here tonight. As mentioned, I am Joe O'Brien. I am about to start my second year of law school at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign.
And I'm Noah Bruner. I'm about to start my second year of law school at the University of Wisconsin.
Great. So we're going to be going over the Trust Act and Illinois' limits on federal immigration enforcement as listed here. For a basic rundown of what we're going to cover in this presentation, we're going to go over the basics of what the Trust Act is and how it works. We're going to go through some of the legal history of it and similar national issues related. Then I'm going to turn it over to Noah, who's going to go over where the municipal approaches is in DuPage County and around the area, our survey of the municipalities in DuPage County, and our takeaways from that. So just going directly into the basics of the law, the Illinois Trust Act prohibits state and local law enforcement from assisting federal agencies on immigration law. So that would be agencies like ICE, CBP, DHS, the various agencies that enforce federal immigration law. It's, among other things, it prohibits law enforcement from detaining or continuing to detain an individual solely on the basis of an immigration detainer or civil immigration warrant, or or any other or form of compliance with an immigration detainer or civil immigration warrant. It does Illinois. This is law enforcement in the state of Illinois, so that's state police and local law enforcement, and cannot stop, arrest, search, detain, or continue to detain an individual solely on that individual's citizenship or immigration status, and they cannot inquire about or investigate the citizenship, immigration status, or place of birth of an individual in custody or is otherwise stopped or detained. Now, that's a lot of beyond this. They also cannot be in participate, aid, support, or assist in any capacity with an immigration agent's enforcement operations. So, for instance, if ICE came into a town and asked a local police officer to be involved in detaining someone for an immigration procedure, they cannot legally say yes. That's in most instances. There are exceptions, which we will get to in a moment. Beyond that, they can't give immigration agents access to any individual in law enforcement custody or transfer them into immigration agency custody. So, by that same token, if ICE or DHS or CBT came here and asked for access to someone in your local police department's jail, they cannot say yes. Beyond that, they also cannot provide information in response to an immigration agent's inquiry or request for information regarding an individual in the agency's custody. So, same thing, they cannot answer or a question from ICE about it. Law enforcement agencies beyond this, beyond just the prohibitions within the law, there's also fairly stringent reporting requirements and basically data keeping, bookkeeping. Law enforcement agencies are required to provide guidance to their officers on compliance with the law, and they're also required to provide annual reports to the Illinois Attorney General's office on their compliance with the law, on the requests that they've received, and this is data that we will be getting into later as well, or well, rather that Noah will. Beyond that, the failure to comply with the requirements of this act may result in an investigation from the Attorney General's office, the results which may be publicized, and perhaps even a state lawsuit against the violating department. Okay, so there are some exceptions, as mentioned. The Trust Act does allow local and state law enforcement to assist federal immigration agencies when presented with a federal criminal warrant or otherwise required by federal law. So this isn't absolute. There are cases where if ICE came to a town in Illinois and provided them with a valid federal criminal warrant, then they would be allowed to assist. Additionally, this is not a limitation on ICE, CBP, or DHS, or any similar agency receiving information from police department in Illinois. It's just that they can't receive additional information. Anything that would be available to the public through a Freedom of Information Act or FOIA request, could be released to immigration agencies on the grounds that that agency could file a FOIA request as well and receive that information. The act also states that it's not designed to impede law enforcement officials from otherwise executing their duties and investigating violations of criminal law and cooperating in such investigations with federal and other law enforcement agencies. So it does not supersede any other normal duties of law enforcement in the state of Illinois. And I know I mentioned civil and criminal immigration warrants. I'm just going to go down a brief distinction between the two. The Trust Act, because the Trust Act distinguishes these, and this limits whether a local police department can and work with ICE or CBP or not. For a civil immigration warrant, this is issued by a federal agency such as ICE, DHS, CBP, and is signed by a federal officer. It does not allow officers to enter private places, such as a home, but it does allow them to arrest someone in public or in private if allowed to enter. A different civil search warrant, and this is called a Blackie's warrant, can also be issued by a magistrate or judge to allow immigration officers to search work sites. And in contrast, a criminal immigration warrant would be issued by a court and signed by a judge or magistrate, and this is issued when there is probable cause that a crime has been committed. So if it's just coming from the federal government and their civil immigration procedures, that does not qualify for permissible compliance under the Trust Act in Illinois. Okay, beyond this, and now getting into the legality, because this sort of policy has often been called a sanctuary policy or sanctuary state, sanctuary city, and there has been significant debate over these on the federal level. And in particular, the Illinois Trust Act has been challenged twice in federal court since its enactment in 2017. The first of these cases would be Prim v. Raoul in 2021, in which a coalition of Illinois county sheriffs who disagreed with the law sued the state attorney general. And United States v. Illinois in 2025, where the federal government sued the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago over their sanctuary policies. In both these cases, the primary argument raised was that the Trust Act intrudes on federal immigration authority as the Supreme Court interprets it. Now, what is federal immigration authority? That would be as defined by United States v. Arizona, a 2012 Supreme Court case. Arizona's policies that were in excess of federal immigration policy were deemed unconstitutional because the federal government determines all immigration laws, and the country has to have one uniform system for this. So no state can alter immigration policy, and these parties have effectively contended that the Trust Act is an alteration of federal immigration policy by the state of Illinois. Right, so that would be the primary basis here. However, this state and federal relationship, there are 17 other states that possess these laws. Illinois was not the first to enact them either. California and Connecticut had already enacted similar laws with similar stated goals by that point. And these laws have also faced similar challenges on similar grounds, such as in the United States v. California. The constitutional challenge to the California Trust Act, which is functionally a very similar law. The wording is a little different to comport with California law, but they do much of the same thing and they are challenged for much of the same reason. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals eventually reached this case and they ruled in favor of California, stating that it does not directly conflict with any obligations that the INA or other federal statutes impose on state or local governments because federal law does not actually mandate any state action. So that would be the key. That's the key distinction here is that the state of Illinois or any state that has a policy of the sort is not actually compelling any additional venture on the immigration policy. In fact, they are specifically getting out of the way so the federal government has sole control over it within their borders. However, beyond this, some critics have also raised the idea that they believe their duties to uphold federal law over state law. Both of these cases, Prim v. Raoul and United States v. Illinois, both of which were dismissed ultimately on similar grounds. Although they did not raise the issues in California, they were dismissed, which means that that the law was upheld. Beyond this, there have also been officials within the state of Illinois, such as a handful of county sheriffs have expressed that they do not believe the law is constitutional and will comply with ICE, DHS, and CBP anyways. There are three in Capital News's survey of the sheriffs of Illinois, out of the 25% of them that responded, Three of them indicated that they would not. One of them, the Adams County Sheriff's Office, stated that he believed that the federal law superseded the state law here and that he has a duty to uphold federal immigration law. However, this is similarly not how this policy functions. The Supreme Court has previously held, under what was called the anti-commandeering doctrine, that it is an essential attribute of the state's retained sovereignty that they remain independent and autonomous within their proper sphere of authority. This case I'm citing, Prince v. United States, dealt with local police officers being compelled to enforce a federal gun policy. So local police officers cannot actually be compelled to enact a federal law that is standing policy that if the federal government wants to do this sort of policy, they have to use their own law enforcement. They cannot compel state and local law enforcement to act. So as it stands, this law does broadly fit with previous constitutional decisions on immigration and on the powers of the federal government to compel the states to enforce federal laws. And now I'm going to turn it over to Noah to discuss the municipal issues.
All right, thanks, Joe. So we heard a lot about how the national perspective goes and the history about that. I want to talk a little bit about what your municipalities might be doing in response to the Trust Act and increased immigration enforcement in the area. So one of the more common ordinances that municipalities will pass is a property limiting ordinance. And what these mostly dictate is that ICE or DHS can't use municipally owned property for immigration enforcement activities. So that may be using a parking lot for a staging of a raid of an apartment building or work site, such, or using a municipal building to process detainees or arrestees, something to the like. These ordinances usually direct the village or the city to erect signage illustrating to immigration agents that you can't use this property for your activities, and even in some cases erect physical barriers to prevent the use of village property for these immigration actions. Usually they also direct city employees to document ICE and DHS violations of these ordinances. So if they see ICE or DHS using village property for immigration enforcement, they bring that back to the village, they report it, record it, and most of them have some reporting to a state agency. Some municipalities that have these ordinances are Aurora, Naperville, Downers Grove, West Chicago, Batavia, Villa Park. And there's been a lot of discussion about, especially in the wake of Operation Midway Blitz, which was the Trump administration's ramping up of immigration enforcement in the area. A lot of municipalities were discussing, should we enact these ordinances, should we not? And that was a big contention recently. Cook County also has similar legislation preventing ICE from using county-owned property for immigration enforcement. So that covers all of Cook County's county-owned property. A couple other common ordinances that you might see in your municipality and municipal code is a welcoming ordinance, which is just a general symbolic statement that the municipality accepts all people, regardless of nationality or citizenship, and they generally promote diversity and inclusion and the like. Specifically, looking at some specific municipalities, the NPD General Order 1.29 was Naperville Police Department's kind of official compliance with the Trust Act statement. So they specifically released this order and said, hey, our police department isn't going to comply with ICE or DHS, kind of putting the community at ease that if they contacted the police department as an immigrant or somebody that was worried about these issues, the police department wasn't going to collude with ICE or immigration agents. DuPage County also adopted this resolution supporting due process and a fair path to citizenship. that's similar to the welcoming ordinance, kind of affirms constitutional protections and due processes for all. So if you go into your own municipal code and look up phrases like immigration or property limiting ordinances, you might find one. These were all the ones that I could find for the due page area. Another requirement of the Trust Act was enacted from an amendment to it, which is the Way Forward Act. And that made state and local law enforcement agencies be required to submit annual reports to the Illinois Attorney General's office. And these reports include any requests or detainers or warrants that the local law enforcement agencies have received from ICE or DHS regarding civil immigration enforcement or any other requests that ICE or DHS want the law enforcement agency to adhere to and help them out in enforcing immigration. The reports should include all of those requests and detainers and warrants, and then also should include how the request was addressed by the law enforcement agency. So this usually means that they'll state what the request was, when it was, the date, the time, and then as well as if it was denied, if it was ignored, or if it was accepted in part. Most of the time, if it's accepted or accepted in part, it's a FOIA request. And then a big thing, if the agency did not receive any requests or detainers or warrants for the year, they have to affirmatively report that to the Attorney General's office. So they have to sign a little box that says, yes, we did not receive any requests or detainers or warrants for this year, which goes a long way in showing that this municipality wasn't being inundated with requests or communications from immigration enforcement. The reports also include the date when the detainer warrant was received, as well as the request, whether the individual was subject to the detainer warrant was transferred or released, and where they were transferred. And that's to show if this individual was transferred to immigration enforcement, they're in violation of the Trust Act. We don't want that. So they have to show if they're being transferred, it's got to be to a state jail or a county jail or something like that. And then when the individual is subject to the detainer or warrant posted criminal bail, if they did so. So if that person was in there for a criminal infraction, if and when they posted bail, that also has to be included on the report. So the crux of that report is public information. It's public documentation that you can go on the Illinois Attorney General's website and look at yourself. So we did that, me and Joe, and we found that the due page portion of the report had all of the municipalities kind of gathered and bundled up into one large chunk that just had due page reporting. So what the center wanted to know was, more specifically, how is each municipality adhering to the Trust Act, and what is their communication and interactions with immigration enforcement? So what we did was the center developed and distributed a survey to 38 municipalities in DuPage County, as well as 5 sheriff offices in the area. We did this through a mixture of calling the law enforcement agencies, sending emails, and then if nothing came back on those, we sent FOIA requests to those law enforcement agencies for their Way Forward Act data. So as of this presentation, we got all of the municipalities surveyed to respond, and 3 out of the 5 sheriff offices to respond in some way. So that doesn't mean that they sent us their data. That doesn't mean that they gave us anything that we used in making this presentation, but they responded to us in some way. We got a call back or something like that. Our main goal with the survey was to discover these specific interactions and then to be able to communicate it to you, the general public, of how maybe your municipality is interacting with immigration enforcement. So at the bottom here, we received specific data from 30 departments that includes sheriff offices. So this is a little synopsis on the data that we got. We will be showing more data as it comes in. We're still waiting on a few places. Next week at our democracy night, which we'll talk about a little bit more after this presentation is done. But just to go through what we got, 6 departments reported receiving requests from ICE or immigration enforcement in 2025. Schaumburg had the most requests in 2025 with 23 requests, which is quite a bit from what we saw. Most of the ones that said they got requests said they were getting 1, maybe 2. So 23 was quite a bit for DuPage. 6 departments reported detainers or warrants. Uh, the the sheriff's offices, Kane County had the most at 112 for 2025, but Lake County also had 109, and McHenry County had 59 or so in 2025. So the sheriff's offices were really getting the brunt of the detainers or warrants that we found. Hanover Park had the most other municipalities with 7. And it says below all that, Addison and McHenry County Sheriff's Office were the only departments to report that they got both requests and detainers or warrants. 20 municipalities in all reported having no requests or detainers in 2025. So the majority of the departments that we contacted said we didn't get any requests or detainers or warrants, which is good. That makes it seem like immigration enforcement isn't contacting a lot of DuPage County police departments. 13 provided us no data. This was through a variety of reasons. Some in receiving the FOIA request said that we do not have any records responsive to your request. Some we haven't heard back from still, and some flat out denied answering our survey in entirety. And then to finish that all off, 5 municipalities only provided data on requests or detainers and warrants. They didn't send us both. So we either got a portion of their Way Forward Act data, or they just emailed us and said we didn't have any requests, but didn't tell us about the detainers. So that pie chart on the right kind of breaks down the percentages. What you're looking at, like I said before, the majority of the responses we got back said that they weren't getting any response or requests or detainers, which we'll cover the takeaways right now. So takeaways of the survey from a compliance standpoint, if you're taking the results at face value, these DuPage municipalities do seem like they're complying with the Trust Act and the Way Forward Act requirements. Many of them didn't receive requests or detainers, so that's perfect. Don't have to really nitpick them on if they were denying them or accepting them or whatever. They're not getting them. Those that did receive requests have high rates of denial or not responding, which is what you want out of the Trust Act. You don't want them to be complying. And then most municipalities provided their Way Forward Act compliance data when requested. Not every municipality wanted to answer the survey, but when we FOIA'd them for their Way Forward Act compliance data, most of them gave that to us, no problems. From a public access standpoint, this is where it gets a little tricky. So the whole point of the Way Forward Act amendment to the Trust Act is to allow the public to be able to go onto the Attorney General's website and go, my municipality is not assisting ICE in blatant disregard of state law. The issue that we found in doing this survey was that it was very tough in some instances to get the information that was supposed to be public from these police departments. So in calling about the survey, we were hung up on several times during the contact phase. We didn't receive a lot of information for follow-ups from departments that were initially cooperative when we talked to them on the phone. And then we routinely faced delays in FOIA, denials in what information we were searching, and other barriers to getting this data. And we just want you all to keep in mind that we're 2 law students and this is our full-time job. And we have the time to just keep sending them FOIA requests and keep changing them. But for the average person trying to get a good look at this, maybe after work or on the weekend, it seems pretty difficult, and there are a lot of barriers to being able to get in quickly, finding the data, and seeing what's going on.
Oh,
So what you can do going forward, federal immigration efforts continue to ramp up nationwide. You can stay informed and get involved. So you can FOIA your police department to see their yearly Way Forward Act data. Reports should be prepared March 1st of the following year. So if you want to look at the 2026 data for this year, you'll have to wait until March 1st of next year to FOIA that. And usually our FOIA request went, hey, my name is Noah Bruner. I'm looking for any data that your department submitted to the Illinois Attorney General's office in compliance with the Way Forward Act. And then we stated like specific years. We were looking at 2025, so we said 2025. And then they usually get back to you within 5 days with that data. You could also contact your mayor, trustee, alderman, elected officials in your municipality to enact an ordinance or resolution that restricts city-owned property use by immigration agents, or similar ordinance stating that we welcome all individuals here, something to the like. You can stay up to date on immigration efforts in the area through news sources. I use the Chicago Tribune. I think they do their immigration coverage pretty well. You can also visit other organizations such as the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights. Their page is all about connecting immigrants and refugees with information, healthcare, stuff like that. They also have some ICE information on there. And you can check out the Citizen Advocacy Center website for more immigration-related research in the future. And I know Sheila will get to this as well. I'll hear some citations. But we will be showing more detailed information on the survey that we enacted Democracy Night next week. That is our presentation. Is there any questions? Or Sheila, do you want to do the Democracy Night blurb?
Sure. So Democracy Night is where all of our summer interns present on topics of interest that they have worked on over the summer. So our other presentations are going to include more information on automatic license plate readers, the history and the future of the Voting Rights Act, budget literacy, so how to receive a government budget and how to read it, and also media literacy, so how to critically evaluate media sources from print media to social media. The event is free for anyone to join. You can sign up on our website, which is citizenadvocacycenter.org. We will be providing food and beverages, and we would love to have a great turnout. So if you would like to come, or if you would like to spread the word, you can find more information on our website or on our social media. One minor correction, it's at 6 p.m. With that, are there any questions for Joe and Noah? Again, this presentation is being recorded, so if you are not comfortable publicly asking your question, you can send it to me in the chat.
Has there been any action taken by the Illinois Attorney General against municipal police departments who are cooperating with federal agents?
There was one investigation against a sheriff's office recently. It was in the back half of 2025, kind of around the height of Operation Midway Blitz. I believe it was McHenry. I can double check really quick. But as far as I remember, it ended with the Illinois Attorney General's office stating that by the time they enacted the investigation, the sheriff's office had stopped cooperating with ICE and DHS. Their last transfer had been months prior to the investigation. So it didn't end with any legal action, it kind of just disappeared because they determined that it wasn't a problem.
Just to add on to that, additionally, on the Illinois Attorney General's website, there was at least one publicized investigation result into, I believe it was Joliet, that talked about their compliance with state regulations of compliance with immigration enforcement and local law enforcement's actions in that front. And they also publicized the results of that. I don't believe there was any legal action taken about that. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but there was. At the bare minimum, they did do a significant investigation and put a publicized report out about it.
Also, it was not the McHenry. It was Madison County Sheriff's Office, Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, Payne County Sheriff's Office, and I believe that's it from what I remember.
Mhm.
And those were all um those apologies. Those sheriff's offices were found to be in defiance of the Trust Act because they were transferring individuals to ICE and DHS, if I'm remembering correctly. And I believe only Madison County Sheriff's Office was investigated.
Well, it seems pretty obvious from the reporting that's going around about the detention of people by certain municipalities like Aurora and Elgin, that seems obvious that these folks are cooperating with the local police, that other areas do not see the same kind of activity.
Mhm.
Yeah, there is a question that we have definitely had in doing this. My particular thoughts were, I knew Operation Midway Blitz was such a widespread push by the federal immigration enforcement to kind of jack up the numbers, especially in Chicago and the surrounding municipalities. So I was really surprised by pretty much a widespread lack of immigration contacting these municipalities. So there definitely is a question of, are these municipalities giving us everything that they should be under the statute? And that's something that is pretty hard for us or for anybody to figure out with the avenues that are set up before us, like FOIA. Um, but at least looking at the data that they have given us, they seem to be adhering to the law.
Mhm.
We have a question from the chat, and that is, why is it necessary for local communities to enact ordinances if the Trust Act is state law?
I would say it's not necessary for local municipalities to enact these property restricting ordinances. I believe that the reason that they do it, and from what I've read, is they want to make sure that their community has trust in their police departments. So by enacting ordinances that affirmatively say, hey, we're going to adhere to the Trust Act, we're not going to transfer you or inform you if you're an immigrant and call our police department, to immigration enforcement, that builds a sense of trust between an immigrant population in the municipality and the police force, so that the possible immigrants or non-citizens feel comfortable with calling the police when there is an issue that they need help with. It's definitely not necessary to do so. The Trust Act is state law. From what I understand, as Joe has said, there have been people in state and other positions of governance that say we don't really like the Trust Act. So I heard that these municipalities just do this to kind of put immigrant communities at ease that they won't be transferred over to immigration enforcement if they call the police.
Mhm. Yeah.
Did you come across any state laws in Illinois or anywhere else that protect people from federal agents who are not following their own policies? Where people who um, have who are in the immigration system, they have paperwork, they have protected status, they have green cards, they have tourist visas, and these people are being snatched off the street by masked and armed federal agents. And is there any state responsibility to deal with those literal kidnappings?
I can say personally that there was nothing specifically regulating the conduct of federal agents within Illinois to that extent. Much of this reflects whether the state of Illinois itself can be involved or what state and local officers can do, as that is much more definitively within the state's purview. Seeing as even just those policies that are the state of Illinois regulating its own officers under a manner that is supported by constitutional precedent on the federal and state levels both have still been challenged repeatedly. The state is put any push further is something that the state is trying to. It seems I can't speak for anyone's motives there, but the state is focused on at least ensuring it's that the laws are where they are still able to be enforced as such, and that they're able to at least keep the state as far from any of this as possible.
Yeah, I would echo something that Joe said early on in this presentation. But as far as the Trust Act goes, to me, it seems like the state of Illinois is just pushing all of the immigration onus onto the federal government, which, like Joe said, they just want to get as far away from that as possible. So in terms of the state putting in anything that punishes the non these actions of federal immigration enforcement in arresting states or U.S. citizens or citizens that should be here legally, that would be something
Turn on the,
that
I got AirPods in. I'm listening to something.
that would be something that I think is, from what I've read in the news as well, is commonly pursued at the federal level and not at the state level. So it's a bit of a black box a little bit, that those type of claims have to be pursued at the federal level and are being done by federal agents.
I have another question from the chat. What can the state police do if the federal agents intimidate voters at polls during this upcoming election?
If the federal agents, can you repeat that, Sheila? If the federal agents intimidate voters? That's a good question. I don't particularly know. There's nothing in the Trust Act or the Way Forward Act that kind of spells out federal agents being placed near voting stations or whatnot to scare individuals that might be here on visas or immigrants in general from voting. And that is an issue that we're seeing in the news, and something that the Trump administration might pursue. I would say I believe there is legislation that dictates that officers have to be a certain distance away from polling places. I know that's kind of like saying, don't worry, the tiger is only this far away from your house or whatnot. It's not very calming, I guess I would say. But I don't think anything in the Trust Act would do anything to protect polling places or prevent against the federal government putting immigration enforcement near these polling places.
Yes, it's just to add on a little bit, I will say that is the idea of federal immigration enforcement officers at polling places in Illinois is something we can call, at least at the moment, somewhat untested legal ground, and that there's nothing specifically in the Trust Act addressing it, but the Trust Act was also, as the Trust Act is currently written, it was not written with that issue being at the level and frequency of mention as it is right now. So this is something that really is just yet to be seen, which is I know it's not a terribly satisfying answer, but that is effectively where we're at.
A follow-up comment that yes, there is legislation, but we don't believe that the DOJ will enforce that law.
Mhm. That is also true. We are asking them to enforce it against themselves.
I will say there is an organization called Common Cause that is recruiting election protection volunteers. So I would recommend checking out their website for more information on what an election protection volunteer can do. I also recommend checking out ICIR, ICIRR, the Illinois Coalition of Immigrant and Refugee Rights. They also have ways that you can volunteer and get involved to help protect immigrant communities. All right, if there are no further questions, or if you think of one, you can always email me and I will pass it along to Joe and Noah, and they will be happy to answer it either by email or if you're able to come to Democracy Night, that is again next Wednesday, the 29th at 6 p.m. at the Wilder Mansion here in Elmhurst. We thank you all so much for attending this presentation. If you have any further questions or comments, feel free to call or check out our website. And I look forward to meeting you in person. Thank you, Joe and Noah, for your presentation.
Thank you.